Kia ora, everybody. This is super exciting for me, someone that I've wanted to get on since talking to Grant Schofield the first time. Gary Fetke, we start off with what you did on the weekend. It's Australia Day weekend yesterday. We couldn't do yesterday because you're busy playing golf. Is that an Australia Day thing, or is this a new lease of life?
No, that's my new. I've actually worked out how to solve everything on the planet. I'll be somewhat smart-assed and Australian and say, look, in the last several years, I was telling you, I've written this book called Inversion, called One Man's Answer for World Peace and Global Health. That was a little topic. We worked that one out a few years ago. So then I've described this model of nutrition and inflammation based. That inflammation is based on what we eat, and that high sugar, high carbs, and polyunsaturated oils. So I've described inflammation, and inflammation sits behind modern disease. So we've worked out the cure for modern disease. There's a out there statement, and so now we've worked out between Belinda and myself all the vested interests that are shaping the dietary guidelines. We've worked out the conflicts of interest of the pharmaceutical and the food industry, and I'm happily married. I've ticked everything on the bucket list. We've got a grandson. I've built my energy efficient house that we're sitting in. This morning I was looking out there, the two kangaroos in the backyard. I've got the chooks for free ranging. I've got the sheep down there if we really do need to actually eat them. And so what have I done? I've decided to go back to golf, all right?
Yeah.
It's the one thing I'll never be able to do.
It's one of those games that you do one good stroke and you're hooked again for another week. How did you go yesterday?
I played to my handicap, so something's going right. And again, I've actually developed an old man's swing now. Awesome. And I used to be a reasonable player 20 years ago, but then I had that tumour, which some people may or may not know about, and I had to actually learn to walk again. So golf, I went from a single figure golfer to having to learn to walk again, and it was pretty scary times. That's 19 years ago coming up now. So that was the start of my health journey.
Yeah, so let's get into that. How did the diagnosis come about, and where did it take your thinking at the time?
Well, back to golf. At the time I was playing in the Orthopaedic Cup Championship thing, which I'd won the 2 previous years, and then that one I had this screaming headache right at the back of my head. I was having a few blues in the public hospital system about infection control because there were issues and it was being covered up. And everyone said, "Oh, look, you're stressed because you had headaches." I said, "I don't get headaches. I give people headaches," which has continued on. That's been a mantra for life.
Yeah.
And someone said, "Oh, you've got to stress." I saw a neurologist and he said, "Look, there's a slight change there." And then I said, he said, "Look, it's just a stress-related thing." So I said, "Look, okay with you, I'm having an MRI this afternoon. And then there's nothing worse, I can guarantee, than one of your mates coming up to you whilst you're in an MRI, having your brain scan, and he says, 'Gary, there's something in there. We'll have to do it, we'll have to give it.'" And I don't know anybody who's had an MRI of their brain before, but you're in this really tight tunnel. And I've got to admit, I shed a tear in there. Nobody was watching, but you're going, oh, 4-letter word, which you can't probably put on air, but you can. And you just don't know. I was 38 at the time, and it was just out of, those people in their 30s, and I've done my triathlons and mucking around, and I was invincible. And then to find out you got this tumour, and 5 days later I was in intensive care after having my brain opened up. So that was scary times. But then that was the start of my own health journey, and it's a good wake up call. And in retrospect, I was overweight. I was eating by the dietary guidelines. I was exercising to lose weight. All that stuff which we've been told to do. Run further, faster, harder, train longer. When in fact, all of that just makes you hungry. And over time, my own health, I was pre-diabetic. My blood pressure was up. I was too busy and had this tumour on the base of my brain. Totally messed up, having radiotherapy, chemotherapy, all that stuff. And then along the way, I started going, hang on, what happened to my nutrition and all that? And so I started eating really healthy by the dietary guidelines. I had my fruit and nut for breakfast, a wholemeal toast, a bit of natural honey on it, a little bit of butter, washed it down with a low fat yogurt, and then by more, realizing in retrospect that I had about 40 teaspoons of sugar for breakfast.
Jesus.
It was crazy. Anyway, the penny finally dropped in 2010, 2011. And I started realizing actually we need to do the exact opposite of the dietary guidelines, and then started working along with that. You mentioned Grant Schofield before.
Yeah.
And I was at a meeting in Auckland, and at that time I came across this one little thing called the Polyol Pathway, which is where the body, the glucose we take up, the carbohydrate we take up, gets converted to fructose. So fructose is half of sugar. You've got glucose and fructose. And fructose, I think, in the amounts that we're having, creates a whole lot of metabolic conditions within the body. And it gets converted into a small, dense LDL, typically known as the bad cholesterol particles. And then when you combine that glucose carbohydrate load, which gets flipped into fructose, and then combine it with polyunsaturated oils, then we've got inflammation. But coming back to Grant, I actually was in Auckland at the FIS meeting, that first one that we're trying to reduce sugar sweetened drinks for the country and the South Pacific. And I was reading this Polyol Pathway thing whilst one of the lectures was going on. I realized that I was slightly distracted. And I passed it sideways to Grant, and I said, Grant, look at this, mate. 40% of glucose gets converted to fructose. This is the Polyol Pathway. And Grant, he looked at me and he went, oh shit. But it was loud enough that everyone turned around and said, what are you guys on about? So it was one of those, I was with Grant when we were starting to work that thing out. So again, my health changed when I started doing the opposite of the dietary guidelines. I started reducing my sugar intake particularly. I then worked out about the polyunsaturated oils, and then lastly I worked out about the role of carbohydrate and the excess there. So for a lot of people now, where this low carb, healthy fat lifestyle, otherwise paleo, another name for it, keto, they're all slightly different slants on the one thing. All this is brand new. I mean, it's an old way of eating, but it's an ancient way of eating. But here it is, the science behind it, it's brand new. It's really only popped out in the last several years. So you've got to feel for my wife, Belinda, because I came home and I said, okay, we're tossing out all the sugar in the house. And so I'd go through and rip through it. But I said, but it's okay to eat potato chips, because as long as we get the low sugar potato chips. And so then, the next step I'd come through and say, we've got to get rid of the polyunsaturated oils. So I'd go through the pantry and start ripping that stuff out. She said, you change one more thing and I'll kill you. She didn't actually, close. And I said, actually, now we've got to get rid of the carbs as well. Yeah. And she said, and I can remember that conversation. She said, if you tell me I've got to give up bacon, that's it. And I said, no, bacon's good. Bacon's fine, and nothing. But so in some respects, we now know, I've got patients, I've got people that I know who reduce their sugar, carbs, polyunsaturated oils, and within days to weeks start feeling better. They reduce the inflammation in the body. I work with a couple of got to get their names right. Here we are. Rheumatologists in Sydney, right. And they call this the anti-inflammatory diet. I've got patients that actually with arthritis of their hips and knees, and I say, go and do this, and they lose their arthritis pain before they lose weight. We know that weight reduction is really important in managing arthritis of the hip and knee, but here they actually lose or significantly reduce their pain with a change of diet well and truly before they actually get that weight reduction. And then the weight reduction is a bonus over time. So I think it's exciting times in medicine if we are willing to challenge the paradigm, if we're willing to challenge these guidelines that have become rule books. And that's where my trouble really started, when I started saying, actually, everything we're talking about is nonsense, but particularly in hospitals.
Mm, yeah. You speak about that rheumatoid pain go away, and I've got dicky hips and cam impingement, and I've had a trim on one of them, and acetabulum was loose, so it needed a couple of screws. And the moment that I do a week like over Christmas where the diet's not quite on point, all of a sudden the pain comes. Now I don't have any problems with weight, but go back to the other way of eating, and away it goes again, and the flexibility and everything comes back. One other thing you said there, and it ties in with that inflammation, is this sort of triathlete, marathon obsessive, outrunning the bad diet thing. Not only are we not able to do that, but two, we've boosted our cortisol and stress and blasted our heart and all that sort of thing, which does no good for our insulin either.
No, that's not good. But then the other thing is the role of keto, low carb in sport, and particularly in triathlons. And I work with a few triathletes who have switched over from being carb burners to fat burners, and they're amazed. It's like a secret weapon. That their times come down, they're training less, and they're recovering faster. We had a diabetes nurse educator work with us, and she decided to start actually triathlons and marathons, in her spare time. And her son, who's a doctor, she's about 50 years of age. She decided to start doing triathlons, and she went across to Adelaide, did this marathon, and her son had done the marathon the previous year. And that night she wanted to go out for dinner and then go for another jog the following day, and her son couldn't believe it. So, because if you're not burning up your muscle when you do these long endurance events. And I think in endurance sport, it's a fascinating and exciting, role to play. And there are AFL teams here in Australia that are actually running low carb during the week, and then they have a bit of carb load on the weekend. I don't think we've got the answer sorted out completely for fast sports. But then the All Blacks ran low carb into the last World Championships.
That's right. Grant's colleague Nick Gill there has got them tapped in, that's for sure. It was funny you say that about triathletes. I was having a discussion with somebody just today, and yesterday he posted 3 bottles of Powerade and a Coke and said not much power, quite a lot of aid. And I said, have you tried something that's a bit more stable like this? There's a product out there called UCAN, which is, I think, a slower carbohydrate release. And, all of a sudden got defensive. And I said, I'm not even telling you to go low carb, no carb, Sorry.
Well, there's an even cheaper alternative out there for the triathletes to fuel their body on those long runs.
Yeah.
And I think Tim Noakes would agree with it. It's called water.
Yeah. Or even no water if you talk to Tim long enough.
Yeah, a bit of water beforehand, but don't overdo it. There's an enormous market out there about eating well to try and improve performance, when in fact, I'm very much anti-supplements, because I think if you put the right fuel in the tank, the engine's going to run along quite nicely. The question is, what's the right fuel?
Yeah, and I guess it's something that we're all guilty of, and it's our biases and cognitive dissonance. And you bring up the fact that many of the Ironman world champs, and Tim has a lot to do with it, are now fueling low carb, and then their quick argument is, well, they're professional and I'm an amateur. And you try to say, well, this person's an amateur and they're doing it too and loving it and have never done better times and all that sort of stuff. So, but anyway, like I say, that we're all guilty of cognitive dissonance, and that's probably one of my questions for you. How do you feel like maybe you're on the right side of the line by doing something opposite, I suppose?
I look at the final quote in that book that I wrote, Inversion, about looking at things differently, is the final quote is, only dead fish swim with the current.
Yeah.
dwell upon that. You think about it, only dead fish swim the current. Like, you know, you're truly alive when you're swimming against it. And if you just want to go with the flow and float along, then you're not, you're passive. You're just accepting what comes your way.
Mm.
And I've found literally virtually everything in the nutrition world is just a house of cards. I took it for granted. I've got a medical degree. I'm supposed to know about diabetes and obesity management, and and presumably our dietary guidelines have been written by people who actually know everything. And the more you look at it, guidelines are written by people who've got too much time on their hands and often given a pay packet from someone with a vested interest. I know that's sad, and but that's the truth, And when you start looking at guidelines and looking at the authors of them and the influences of them, particularly in dietary guidelines and vegetarianism, the acceptance that veganism and vegetarianism is not a fad diet.
Mm.
The people who wrote that material for the American Dietetics Association and the Australian one were all essentially vegetarians who came out of the Adventist Church and Sanitarium here in Australia and Kellogg's in the US. So we've got vegetarian religious groups actually writing the fact that vegetarianism and veganism is a safe option for the dietary guidelines around the world. It's more of a fad diet excluding major food groups, like meat and dairy, than anything on the planet. So in Australia, there's a thing called the Medical Journal of Australia, and there was a huge supplement a couple of years ago that went out to every doctor in Australia talking about the benefits of vegetarianism and veganism, and having a diet based on cereal and grain and fruits, nuts, legumes. And the only problem with that is, again, all the authors work for Adventist Hospital, they work for Sanitarium, they were vegetarians or vegans. And they didn't declare that conflict of interest.
Mm.
And I'm all for personal choice. If you want to do that for whatever reason and whatever information that you have available to yourself, you can do that. But you shouldn't be writing the dietary guidelines for the entire population. And the dietary guidelines are for the entire population, but they are the rule books for what you feed patients in hospital, what you feed children in schools, nursing homes, the Defence Forces, and the prisons. So that is only food that's available. And to point out how ridiculous it is, in hospitals in Australia, there's still a recommendation for patients with diabetes to have 3 desserts per day. I'm not making that up.
No.
So therefore, I'm an orthopaedic surgeon, and in northern Tasmania for many years, I've been looking after the complications of diabetes, and particularly that around the foot and ankle. And I'm literally, I was chopping off little bits of toes, feet every week, regularly doing amputations below the knee, and I'm trying to. And you get sick of that. It is not a pleasant job. No one else was doing it. And then you start going, hang on, we've got a cure here for it. Or, we can reverse this around. We can turn this whole tsunami around. And it starts with simply, would you stop serving 3 ice creams to my patients with diabetes in hospital? Stop giving them soft drinks. Stop giving them apple juice, orange juice, which is shooting their blood sugars out of whack.
Cereal,
I don't know if you
low-fat yogurt for breakfast.
Yeah, all I was actually trying to introduce at the hospital was that my patients could be given cheese, a full-fat yogurt, and an egg.
Mm.
That's it. I said, stop giving them so much soft drink, lemonade, ice cream, low-fat nonsense, and all the carbs. I'd like them to be given the option, not force it to them, just the option of eggs, cheese, and full-fat yogurt. And I got this enormous kickback within the hospital. I was obviously campaigning about let's get rid of soft drinks out of the hospital kiosk and reducing the amount of junk food, which at the time was just coming into alignment with what New Zealand was doing. They were well ahead of the pack. And every hospital, every public hospital in Australia now has a junk food policy in place to reduce all of that, except for Tasmania.
Mm.
Now, we're still the only place. We've got the lead, for want of a better term, the leading rates of obesity and diabetes in Australia. We've got poor health outcomes, only second to the Northern Territory. Yet we don't have a junk food policy in hospitals. And hospitals are supposed to be, temples of health, and I just think pillars of, plague and doom at the moment. Well, that sounds dramatic, but you've got to start using this language when people aren't paying attention to you.
That's right. So before we delve into what's been, I don't know, tumultuous period of life, and that's having dealt with cancer beforehand, sorry. Who is Gary Fetke now today?
Oh, look, I am really in a good spot.
Yeah.
And I'll say myself and Belinda, and so, coming back to where we started, we've actually got a really good handle on our own health.
Yeah.
Our family's health. We're watching our grandson now grow up without processed food in his diet. He's a little nugget. He is, reaching his milestones. I've worked out something about how to throw a ball. No, it's really. I gave a talk in Fiji recently about where's the best spot to hide something. Yeah. Which is, it sounds like a silly talk, but I gave 2 medical examples and 1 sporting one. And and so, it was a 20-minute talk, and it kept everyone entertained. But the third one was the perfect throw, the perfect golf swing, the perfect strike of the ball, whether or not it's tennis or baseball or cricket. It all comes down to 4 things called the body swing.
Uh-huh.
I realise it's got nothing to do with nutrition, but it's actually, you asked me where I'm at. So this is my goal, is to actually teach my grandson this concept. And the most important thing, I'll just leave it intriguing you, that the body swing, the most important thing of throwing the perfect ball or hitting the perfect ball is that you end up with your knees together.
Mm.
So we've all watched, or you've thrown a ball, you've done something, you've watched elite athletes do this, and there's 4 components to it, and none of it's got to do with your arm, none of it's got to do with watching the ball. It's actually what you do with your body. 4 things, so of which the surprising thing is you need to end up with your knees together. And so again, we've watched it, it's been hidden in plain sight forever.
Mm.
Just we haven't observed it, which is, I recognise I've got a bit of an alternative way of looking at things, but all this nutrition stuff is actually been hidden in plain sight. All this health stuff is in plain sight. We've just decided to, ignore it because we've listened to the propaganda for so long. So where am I now and what am I doing? I've rewritten the dietary guidelines for the world. Okay, I realise because let's come up with something really simple that's applicable to all. That doesn't involve any politics and doesn't involve vested interests. And my aim for dietary guidelines of the world is that we should eat food that is fresh, local, seasonal, based on your cultural requirements and your environment, reducing sugars and processed foods. That's it. I have in there, in fact, defined low carb, healthy fat living though. So if you eat fresh, local and seasonal, you can't actually eat something out of a packet.
Mm.
So it's not processed, it's not high in sugar, it's not high in carbs. And if it's fresh and local, it becomes low carb, healthy fat. That environment thing's really important because I think we should eat by our latitude. So the closer you are to the equator, the more vitamin D exposure you've got, and the more you can actually metabolize the byproducts of fructose metabolism. And the further you get away from the equator, the less you have of vitamin D, and therefore you should be going towards more of, a meat-based, because we're less able to metabolize sugar and carbs. So it's interesting that there's more year-round availability of fruits closer to the equator than there is the further you get away. I think God is very clever. In fact, that it's given us a metabolism that suits our latitude. And in Tasmania, so, you know, where patients tell me, I need my banana, I say, well, tell me where the local banana plantation is here in Tasmania. And there's nothing, you know. It's a bit like trying to find a banana plantation in Iceland. It's not going to happen.
Or New Zealand, for that matter. Plenty of Ecuadorian bananas in New Zealand.
That's right. Well, the biggest export in the world are bananas and oranges.
Yeah.
And the huge transport miles in that, which is, you know, clearly not good for the environment either.
And I guess that is the irony of, we might as well get into it now, this Eat Lancet, I guess, direction for the world to take based on the environment, that inverted commas, meat is bad and cows are bad and farming is bad, yet we want to ship food around the world, and especially stuff that we've made.
Oh, and not just Eat Lancet, but the huge environmental impact meeting in Davos recently had something like 1,800 private planes were flown into the meeting. Really? You know, it's just, so nobody came in on commercial, or not nobody, but the vast majority of people that, you know, the leaders that were speaking there at summits came in on their personal airplanes. So, look, the irony is that when you start, you know, looking at this, oh crikey, you know, how far do we go? Like the Eat Lancet push has been a well orchestrated campaign. There's another one. I've just been privy to a paper that's been embargoed for another few days, which is again pushing the fact that meat is bad for us and bad for the planet. And we can come back to the origins of that in a second, but they brought together 37 experts, which were paid for to come together and fly. But 85% of those had either vegan or vegetarian origins, and all published or written or spoken about their beliefs before they actually came together. So you get one group of people that are biased before you enter and you get them into one meeting room. It's a bit like getting all the, 85% of the people in the oil industry get together and say, you know, we need to burn more fossil fuel because that's good for the planet. You know, there you go. You've got to declare your conflicts of interest, which weren't. Mm-hmm. Then you've got 30 apparently the 37 experts actually don't eat this recommended diet that they're putting forward. And then you've got the proponents of it who are recommending this vegan lifestyle, yet a flexitarian and Peter, Gord Harlan, he was caught recently in Las Vegas, having his huge stack of hamburger. And so therefore we've got these people saying, determined billionaires and billionaire companies, because the supporters of that Eat Lancet campaign include Nestle, Kellogg's, PepsiCo, and Unilever. Unilever's in the process of selling out of their margarine industry because that's lousy for them. They moved completely into the alternative fake meat arena. Mm-hmm. So you've got these enormous corporations telling us that we should eat more fake food and processed food. Now, does anyone think there's something suspicious about that? Mm-hmm. With the biggest media campaign of all time that came out before the published paper from Eat Lancet, and these are billion-dollar industries putting together multi-million, if not billion-dollar schemes in place to have us convinced that this, got a role to play. And if it was all based on balanced science, it would be fine, but it's not. Because for every one of the arguments put forward, there is a reverse argument that's out there. And I don't know the answer, but I know that what's been put forward in the Eat Lancet is not balanced. Even the references in there, they reference that Ansel Keys' work in the 1970s was in fact proof that the Eat Lancet, you've got one nutrition expert who's Walter Willett, who's come from the Harvard T.C. Chan School of Public Health. They're major promoters of vegetarian, anti-meat agendas. But you've got to work out that the origins of that School of Public Health and Nutrition Reviews was set up by, was it 6 or 7 food industries in the 1940s. They provided the seed money, and last year, Harvard T.C. Chan School of Public Health received $933 million in sponsorship. And so it came from, significant amounts from the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Nina Tykolts has put all these references up there. They're, freely available, on the web. And so we've got, now their head is Walter Willett, their professor. All the chairs of that School of Public Health have actually had financial and significant ties with the food industry ever since its inception. He's got all these undeclared conflicts of interest, and he's the only nutritionist advising the Eat Lancet board. So here we've got one person with clear conflicts of interest from an institution which is conflicted with the food industry right from its very origins, is giving advice to Eat Lancet. And then that document is being presented to the United Nations right around the world, governments, as proof that we have to, in fact, eat less meat to save the planet. You can see I can get my blood boiling really quickly on this one.
And just while we're there, what's Walter Willett, there's big associations with Loma Linda and those that listen to the Joe Rogan debate of vegan versus paleo keto. That name kept coming up as proof that, hey, Loma Linda's a blue zone. These guys eating a vegan diet live forever. And Chris Kresser quickly pointed out that, hey, Mormons also have a very good health span as well, and they've got no problem eating meat. It just keeps going a bit deeper and deeper, and you guys, you and Belinda, are well within the rabbit warren, and it just must keep going, and you must keep going every day.
Well, we could, to summarise that really quickly, and this has all been completely acknowledged by the Adventist Church. Okay, August last year, they actually acknowledged what I'm about to say. And in their 20-page document in a journal called Religion, we're actually referenced. So we've become the outside experts on the Adventist Church. So if we look at today, this is crazy. But anyway, this is Belinda's work. I was talking about the science. I was getting hammered. I got reported to the medical board. And Belinda said, look, you and Tim Noakes, you guys are talking the science. It's blatantly obvious what you're doing. You're right on that. At the biochemistry. So what are you getting into trouble for? And we thought it was the cereal industry, we thought it was the sugar industry, but in fact it was probably the anti-meat lobby that were after us as much as anything. So long and the short of it is, our diet, the world's getting fatter and sicker. I won't use the word obese, but that's just being politically correct. We're getting fatter and sicker.
And depressed.
The diet, pardon?
And depressed.
Oh yeah, well, with that, modern disease is totally out of control. And very clearly, what we're eating is responsible for it. You can talk about sleep and light and environment and everything, but ultimately what fuel we put in our bodies plays a central role. We have been following the dietary guidelines. We've got US and Australian data that says over the last 50 years, we have reduced our meat consumption. We've reduced our red meat consumption. We're having more cereals. We're having more grains, we're having more fruit and vegetables. We have, in fact, as society, followed the dietary guidelines, and we've gotten fatter and sicker, higher rates of obesity, diabetes, cancer, the lot.
And we've exercised more as well.
We've been trying to outrun our bad diets. The term, just tangentially, the term exercise is medicine. All right, you've heard that? Exercise is medicine. Originally trademarked by Coca-Cola. It's part of this huge disinformation campaign.
Major sponsor of the Olympics.
And FIFA soccer, that's called health washing your brand.
Yeah.
Or probably health bleaching, I think. I've just made that up. Remind me, I've got to put it down somewhere.
Health bleach.
So the food guidelines of the world have been an abject failure. So what Belinda's work is to look at the origins of the food guidelines. And so we've gone back, and in October 1917, the American Dietetics Association was formed, and with an agenda that has ultimately left us with where we are now. So our food guidelines are cereal-based, grain-based, anti-meat, anti-dairy, rapidly becoming vegan and vegetarian. So the American Dietetics Association was formed by a woman by the name of Lena Cooper, who was vegetarian, a Seventh-day Adventist, and who was working and liaising with a fellow by the name of John Harvey Kellogg. So the Kellogg's brothers started, well, John Harvey and William Keith started Kellogg's Cornflakes, 1890s, and 101 cereal companies were born in Battle Creek, Michigan. Virtually all but, that had Seventh-day Adventist origins. Now, the Adventists have a very strong religious belief that we need to be eating by the Garden of Eden diet, and that is they were vegetarian, but as it turns out, they're actually vegan. The term veganism actually didn't turn up until the 1940s. So their description of the Garden of Eden diet is actually veganism, even though they were vegetarian at the time. So it was born out of the visions of Ellen G. White in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. She had a head injury as a 16-year-old. She came up with the term, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Her belief and the belief of the Adventist Church is that Christ is coming back, which is fine, they can believe that, and but they need to be clean and pure, and that masturbation, I say it again, masturbation is the worst sin of all time, and therefore you will not get salvation if you do that. And the concept is that meat, it originally started off was meat causes masturbation, meat causes violence. So she wrote books about that, and the very first book was about actually avoiding masturbation, because it was a book to mothers, and that topic is still a handout that the Adventist Church puts out all the time about the evils of masturbation. The person who was typesetting that book for her as a 12-year-old was John Harvey Kellogg. Here's a 12-year-old boy who's typesetting a book about masturbation and the evils, and your brain will implode if you actually masturbate. Turned out to be the fellow who, in fact, designed and invented cornflakes. Cornflakes were invented to actually quell our lustful thoughts and to stop us from masturbation. And that was the #1 bland food that was actually produced at Battle Creek Sanitarium to come there to improve your health. I'm not making this stuff up, okay? It's freely available. And, I often say to people, look, just Google cereal and masturbation. Right? The term John Harvey Kellogg comes up straight away. Even National Geographic did an article on this topic last year. So here we have got a primary belief of a group that are wanting to actually stop us for salvation, to stop us from masturbating. To do that, the term meat causes masturbation, meat causes violence came up. She came up with the term meat causes cancer. This is in the 1880s. And so all of these things didn't actually stop us from eating meat. So then we drifted down the pathway of inventing the cereal. So, she was also, in the concept she wrote about that we would find foods that were meat and protein substitutes over time. In the 1940s, the Adventist Church, through a fellow by the name of Harry China Miller, brought soy from the east to the west. He set up 19 hospital institutes over there as a missionary, set up 19 soy plants in association with it. And the whole soy industry, which is now the fake meat, fake dairy basis, infant soy formula, was actually brought to the US by the Adventist Church and has infiltrated, the whole business model now of soy right through the world. So, the Adventist Church is, they are 0.3% of the world's population, about 1% of the Christians on the planet, yet they have gotten into, now the United Nations, their Garden of Eden diet. People will think, I've never heard of the Adventist Church, but they are the second biggest educator in the world after the Catholic Church. They own several thousand schools, from primary schools to secondary schools. They own hundreds of universities. They own 800 plus radio stations. They own 400 plus television stations. 2016, they had 70,000 podcasts with 1.4 billion downloads. They are the ones who are writing the dietary guidelines of the world. They set up the American Dietetics Association. Every Western Dietetics Association followed suit. Leonard Cooper wrote the textbooks for the next 40 years for dietetics for the world. They have been instrumental in writing medical textbooks, medical journals. They own 60 publishing houses. They own 22 food industries. They are significantly involved in the cereal industry of the world and the soy industry of the world. Just think about those two industries, that a significant portion of the profit from those is going back to the Adventist Church for them to promote the whole concept of veganism, plant-based diet, lifestyle medicine, and inextricably linked up now with Coca-Cola and the food industry through the exercise as medicine arm. There's a lot in that last statement there, but they are inextricably linked there. And when we come to the Eat Lancet, same thing, you start probing in there and you start seeing all the Seventh-day Adventist connections coming up again. They've been working hard at this for 100 years. There's a lot of dollars behind them. They are completely entrenched in with the food industry because it suited both of their arms. The food industries followed dietary guidelines because that's where the money is. And unfortunately, pharmaceutical industry is in there as well, because if we actually stay, and I'm really cynical, I realise I'm a doctor, but if we keep people just a little bit sick and keep them chronically diseased, there's an enormous amount of profit in there. And I know that sounds very conspiracy theorist, but I think the individuals working for these companies are not. But there is this culture behind it that, and the belief that's actually been kept there through what I call generational education. I mean, you believe something that your teachers taught you, and if their teachers taught them the same thing backwards and backwards for 100 years, all of a sudden we start believing that meat causes cancer, or meat's bad for you, or meat makes you violent, or and then we even start believing that cows are cause of climate change. That is the biggest load of cow patty, right, of all time. It's just I've got some data. And again, I don't know the answer, but there's two sides to the coin. The biggest producers in the animal kingdom of methane are termites.
Yeah.
Termites, millipedes, scarab beetles, and cockroaches. They've got little methane-producing organisms on their tails. But we don't, and there's trillions of them around the planet, all producing methane. But we're not out there, trying to save, or squash termites. Land produces more methane. I've got 3 papers in the last 12 months that have come out looking at the net positive carbon footprint of a cow, because they eat grass, which comes from carbon dioxide, and they put the only thing our soil needs back into it, called organic matter. And we need organic matter in the topsoil so it can retain moisture. Without that, we start eroding our soil, and our soil is now depleted of all sorts of minerals, and to the point that it's sterile, and we're losing our agricultural land because of the monocultures that are across it. We're losing it because of monocultures. We're not losing it because of the fact of cattle. And there's wild exaggerations in the amount of food that's produced for feeding cattle. Now, I'm not into factory farming of cattle or pigs or chickens, but we've got this enormous 20 to 24% of the Earth's surface, which is grasslands, which are not amenable to ploughing the soil, that we can actually put these ruminants on, actually turn our CO2 gas equation around. And again, we need a balanced discussion on this rather than this one-sided one, which is driven by disinformation and, as it turns out, religious ideology. And that's where Belinda's work, what we've been talking about. And 18 months ago, when we started, literally coming out with it, we went and got our wills, redone with our lawyer. because I was on the way to the US to give this talk. As it turned out, 4 hours drive from Battle Creek, Michigan, at the CrossFit Games. CrossFit's an interesting group. Greg Glassman, he's written 100 words which describes CrossFit. And a lot of people listening to this will probably be aware of it. The first 12 words of CrossFit is low carb, healthy fat. Eat this way and it puts you in tune with your body. So Greg asked me to come across and give a controversial talk. And I said, okay. And I caught up with him. I said, look, I'm going to talk about religion, the Adventist church, and the whole origins of everything's been screwed up by that process. And he said, oh, this will be interesting. And the day before I gave that talk, I sat down with Tim, because Tim and I were the two invited speakers. And Tim sat there for half an hour as I described it. His jaw dropped open. He said, okay, I get it now. I understand where he'd been done over as well. And it put into place a whole lot of players. But to give you an idea of the controversy of what I'm talking about, is Belinda had been working on this for a couple of years. I said to her, I'm not going to let you speak on it publicly first time. We went to Wales. Do you know Zoe Harkham? Yep. Zoe? Yep. So I'd met Zoe and Andy, her husband, and I said, I rang her up and said, Zoe, can we come and stay a few days with you? And she said, yeah, what do you want? I said, I just want to talk to you about something. So we went and stayed with Zoe and Andy, and you can't actually ever find them. They're in a Welsh village with some completely unpronounceable name, filled with hedgerows. And Marika Sorbis from Cape Town flew up as well. And we told them this story. And the 5 of us that sat there in their place, all with our laptops going. And I said, please tell us we're wrong before I'm about to get out there and announce to the world all this stuff and make the biggest fool of myself. And we sat there for 5 days. I'm not kidding. We had lots of chats. Zoe makes this magnificent 90% chocolate mousse, by the way. Low carb. And they said, actually, you're right. And then we said, okay, so we could bounce the topic off them, because Belinda and I had just been talking about it in our house every night for a couple of years ago. This can't be the case. But it was all because the expert witness that appeared in my case, he came out of nowhere. He's a very influential professor of nutrition, came out to have a crack at this lowly orthopaedic surgeon from Tasmania. And he, at the time, was working for Sanitarium. And Sanitarium is an Adventist church-owned company that makes breakfast cereal here in Australia and up and going a whole lot of right into alternative meats as well. In the same time frame, in 2014, I don't know if you saw this, the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturing Forum, they meet, the CEOs of Nestle, Kellogg, Sanitarium, Freedom Foods, Food and Grocery Council, they meet, and they had a briefing document with them that said the concepts of low carb and paleo are affecting cereal sales in Australia and New Zealand. And that these people, 8 people, need to be targeted with active defence. I made it, I was the only doctor on that list.
Yeah, and Pete Evans.
Pete Evans. So Pete was there, Marianne DeMarcy, David Gillespie, Kieran Rooney, myself. I've got a blank on a couple of the others. But here here we've got the food industry at that time, and in those documents that were revealed, that they were engaging with the Dietitians Association of Australia. They paid the Dietitians Association. Their only paid agreement with any group was to endorse and push and defend the benefits of cereal and sugar. So we've got the Dietitians Association, which is being directly paid for by the cereal industry of Australia to tell Australians that they should be fine with eating cereal and endorsing the message of sugar. We've got the documents. The problem with that is the Dietitians Association of Australia, modelled on the original American ones, are writing the dietary guidelines effectively for Australia, which is what turns up in the food that my patients are needing to eat in hospital, what's being served in the schools. Again, as an individual, you can decide whatever you want to do, but stop dictating what has to be supplied in all the institutions, because that is the model, that's the promotion. And then if you actually start talking against it, if I'm questioning a food industry religious ideology based guideline, then I get into trouble for it, which is all that happened when I started saying hospital food needs to improve, hospital food's lousy, we've got to reduce the amount of sugar and carbs in it, stop selling soft drink in hospital. That was my crime. And as it turns out, it's religious-based corporate food guidelines. And that's what's got to be challenged. And the Eat Lancet is just the current phase of that. And if it was based on balanced science with a balanced debate, all good and well, but it's not. It's actually coming out of ideology, and it's coming out of food industry sponsorship. And that's undeclared until you go searching for it.
Absolutely. And, it's industry protecting their brand, as they said in that document. These people are affecting our brand, affecting our bottom line. And like you mentioned there, it's massive business. And then I think the thing that gets me scratching my head the most is that you get taken to APRA, but the Dietary Association is not a member of APRA, and they're in fact this independent unit who, as you mentioned, were previously funded by seed cereals and that sort of stuff. How does that make you feel? Obviously,
look, well, partly the Barbara Streisand effect. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, what is that?
It's written up. It's Barbara Streisand tried to quell, some photographs that appeared of a house on the internet, and the moment she tried to silence it, the whole thing blew up in her face. So, APRA were completely out of their realm of jurisdiction, and it's taken 5 years of my life and our life, and it's quite clearly stressful. Same thing with Tim. Tim and I were being investigated at the same time. His case was in fact a public court case. Mine was all behind closed doors in a star chamber. And but Tim and I have become good mates over a long period of time. And at his Cape Town meeting, I got to introduce him for his plenary speech. So I'll never forget that. As what an honour to introduce Tim Noakes in Cape Town, in his hometown, for his for his plenary speech. But so what we've been able to uncover, if it wasn't for me getting into trouble and then Belinda trying to help me get out of it, we would never have uncovered this stuff. So the mere fact that we're actually out there and that you're aware that Sanitarium and the Adventists are actually playing a role in our dietary guidelines of the world, you're aware that the Eat Lancet is actually tied up with the food industry. I can't let people know how much research Belinda's put into this, and that people contact her from around the world to try and work out, tell me the vested interest, and particularly people who are speaking in public and are about to enter a debate. It's really important to know what hat they're wearing. So if you want to have a debate with me, I'm perfectly fine with it. But just let me know if you're a vegan, or if you come from the food industry or the pharmaceutical industry. If you're a rep who comes to me to show me an orthopaedic product, I know that you're trying to sell me something. And the rep knows that they're trying to sell me something. But a lot of people in these debates don't even know what hat they're wearing. Now, if you want to be a vegan and you're promoting veganism, and you're unaware of the origins of veganism, which is in fact it's from the Garden of Eden diet, which is based on religious ideology for salvation of a few, then that's fine. But understand the origins and the history of your belief. That's what Christians do, Muslims do, Buddhists do. They know the history of their belief. And I respect them for it. As long as you know where you're coming from. But if you honestly are taking up a political cause or an activist cause, and you're causing harm, which a lot of activists in this field are doing, then make certain you're aware of your origins. And if you're not aware that they're actually coming from the corporate food industry, funded by the corporate food industry based on this religious ideology to stop you from masturbating, then go home. Go back and start learning before you get out again. And again, I'm not into animal cruelty. I'm not into animal factory farming. And we've got our own animals. I've got my own sheep and I've got my own chickens at free range. and I give them wheat, you know, which we get from a local farmer. I don't give them the processed grain, because guess what? The processed seed mixes for chooks even has polyunsaturated oil on it. You know, it's really hard even to get my chooks eating well. So they free range and they eat all the bugs around. Guess what? They're carnivores. Yeah.
And rats,
you give them
mice.
And they cut down the mice population around here as well. So anybody thinks that chickens are grain-based vegetarians, well, you know, give them a bit of meat and see what happens.
They're raptors.
Where did I get? How did we get there?
Just if someone wants to have a debate with you, I understand where you're coming from, and you say about how Belinda's gone back in the history. That's something, you know, love him or hate him, and he gets a lot of criticism, as well as Gary Taubes, coming from a physics background where he understood that the reason why we have this law of physics is because this person here and this at this point in time discovered this equation and proved it with this, means that we have that, so therefore this means this. He went back and did the same thing with nutrition and came to some similar conclusions as you guys. Is the reason why we have this dietary guideline is this was funded by this and this point in time, and in alignment with this policy at government, and well, here's our dietary guideline.
That's right. It's vested interests, and it's a house of cards. I sometimes talk about the difference between nutrition science and medical science, or science. Most people have heard of the scientific method, which is you make an observation, you then come up with a hypothesis, you test it, you retest it, you come up with a conclusion, and you may implement some change based on that finding.
Also, somebody else can go and do it based on your method as well.
Yeah, and then it's repeatable. And gosh, there's so much stuff in medicine which has not been able to be repeated. That's a story for another day. Now, so therefore, that's the scientific method, and it's open to bias, but that is the method. The trouble with nutrition science, and again, the Adventists coined the term nutrition science. They came up with it. They openly admit that we came up with the term nutrition science. Nutrition science is actually a business model originally designed to prove the visions of Ellen G. White. Again, back to Harry China Miller, that's what he said. We need to prove the visions of Ellen G. White. We need to prove the Garden of Eden diet. And that's why the Adventist health studies were started. So everyone talks about the Adventists living longer. Well, that's because they say they live longer. But next door to Loma Linda University, which is an Adventist university, the Mormons live longer. I've actually got a similar paper saying that the Jews in that similar area live longer. They keep quoting the blue zones and the Okinawans. I've actually got a whole lot of data, a whole lot of papers done at the same time, saying that the Okinawans were actually eating pork. Yeah. They weren't vegan vegetarians, right? But they were eating fresh, local, seasonal. They were eating based on their culture and their environment, and they wasn't high in sugar or processed food. But the fact is, the cherry picking of data by the blue zones in particular, and I used to quote the blue zones as, here's the benefits of actually eating well, because if you eat well, you'll be healthier. My observation of the blue zones was not what they were eating, it's what they weren't eating. So if you actually look across those cultures, it wasn't because they were vegans or vegetarians, but they were not eating foods high in sugar, processed, and they were definitely avoiding the polyunsaturated oils. So there's all this merit for the blue zones, but not on the conclusion that because it was anti-meat, because they were eating meat when you start looking at the data. But again, this is just house of cards stuff. So nutrition science is actually about, number one, started with origins to prove the visions of someone. Secondly, in a commercial sense, it's about improving your shelf life, your productivity, your transportability, and ultimately the profit. So the bliss point is something that's aimed for. Let's get just the right amount of sugar, the right amount of fat, get the right amount of taste there, put it in a packet, and then sell it. And there's an enormous amount of scientific action in that field. You know, you're testing product, you're doing human testing, you're doing palatability, you're trying to work out how you can process. But don't for 1 second believe that that's actually the scientific method. So we as a consumer in medicine have actually fallen for that. We failed to recognize that there's a huge difference between the scientific method and nutrition science. And Gary Taubes was one of the first that I'm aware of in a big sense, to actually make that conclusion. Hang on, this is actually not science. And when you take nutrition science and then you put lobbyists behind it and food industry dollars and sponsorship of journal articles and sponsorship of the media, then all of a sudden, you know, you've got a message that you keep putting out to the world. You know, when we fell for that with the low-fat guidelines for 40 or 50 years, and that's turned out to be an entire disaster. In the same breath, we also fell for the message of, you know, a cereal and grain-based food pyramid, reducing our saturated fat, reducing our meat and dairy consumption, and we've gotten back to the full circle. We've gotten fatter and sicker again, and it's all just been a con. Yeah. But if you call it out for being a con, then you're accused of being, you know, anti-establishment.
You're a heretic.
or right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. No, I said there when you added it, we've got fatter and sicker, and I said, and more depressed. And you're one for highlighting the fact that in the medical industry, there's a huge amount of bullying. And that was one of the topics that Grant started off with when I talked to him the first time, is about hand washing. That didn't go well for the person that decided that we should wash our hands before doing a medical procedure. And you mentioned there that for the 5 years you were investigated, Tim Oakes was also being investigated, and you guys became good friends. How important was, one, to have somebody who can absolutely understand what you're going through, and two, to have a great friendship and support? And you mentioned a few other names there, and of course your wife Belinda.
Look, there's that low carb summit in South Africa. I have the poster from that, which is a picture of Cape Town, and around it I've got the signatures of all the people that were there. I've an enormous amount of respect for those people because they've stood up, they've challenged the paradigm. Tim and I might have been, and Anna Dahlqvist before us in Sweden, might have been caught in the limelight, or, you know, or the spotlight, probably not the limelight. And as it turns out, the similarities between the three of our cases, they flow on. And that support from that group of people has been amazing. I've been challenging the medical board here in Australia. We've actually got major problems with our jurisdiction of health professionals. That's not just doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists.
Optometrists.
We've got a draconian... Pardon?
Optometrists.
Yeah, physiotherapists, so everyone trying to help people. We have a draconian system in place where if you're investigated by the board, even if it's vexatiously, enormous mental stress, near on 20 times the suicide rate of the normal population. I'm mentoring people virtually every week on that, who are being done over by the process. So our medical regulator needs scrutiny, needs an open and transparent process. Because in my situation, I challenged that right from the word go. I said, this is ridiculous. This is a stitch-up job. There's never been a case of patient harm, patient complaint. Very much similar to Tim. This is the food industry, the Dietitians Association, which is effectively a union well and truly tied up with the food industry, is actually, you know, trying to silence people who are speaking out against them. So in the process of that, you know, Tim and I shared information. There are links between the South African dietitians involved in his case and the Australian dietitians involved in mine. We've got pictures of the CEO, Claire Hewitt, who was writing letters to my hospital here in Australia, you know, teed up with the dietitians who were reporting Tim. This is all in exactly the same time frame. And we can say, oh, that's an association, but gee, it's a very, very close coincidence. And tied up with the fact that we've got food industry documents saying you need to be silencing these people. Well, fair go. I mean, this is, yes, okay, well, it's a conspiracy, and maybe I'm a bit paranoid, but how often do you get named for targeting on a document run by billion-dollar industries? So part of me is proud that I'm on that list, and the other part of me goes, shit, scared. You might get knocked off. But bring it on, because Belinda and I are actually at peace. We've actually sorted through it all. We know what hat you're wearing when you come to the table, even if you don't know it. We understand the vested interests at play. We ourselves are living that life. We've got our own health in order. It's certainly helping the health of our family and our friends and then that wider community. When I was finally cleared by APRA, it took 5 years of arguing. It took time to go to the National Ombudsman. And when it finally got reviewed by an independent medical board, they threw it out within a few weeks. There are thousands of pages of documents. They said, look, this is ridiculous. Should never have been investigated in the first place. And we apologise. Now, that's the very first time, not only did someone get off, but it's the first time here in Australia that someone's received an apology from the APRA board. And that's really important. I'm glad they actually made a mistake. Maybe it's a turning point. Tim hasn't got an apology. He's had his case overturned, and they're challenging it again. But it does mean, pardon?
Again.
But it does actually mean, with Anna Dahlqvist's case in Sweden, Tim's in South Africa, mine here in Australia, I'm aware of a case in Canada where we helped someone get off her case, where, again, dietitians reported her to the Canadian Medical Board. There's similar sort of things happening in the UK, but the simple overturning now of 3 cases based on the science of doctors talking about health and nutrition has meant that it really has opened the floodgates for health professionals to actually talk about it. And we've been contacted by thousands of doctors from around the world to say, okay, now we're free, we can talk about it. And so that 2018, with Tim's clearing and my clearing, we hope to see have been a big turning point. So when I did get cleared, I got the phone call from APRA saying, we're about to send you a letter saying that you've been cleared. Belinda came in, we had a hug, tears of joy. And I'm not ashamed to say that, not tears of joy, tears of relief, I suppose. Because my whole medical registration has been on the line. It's cost us time, energy. It's cost us and our staff, cost us financially hundreds of thousands of dollars just to stand up for what was right. But the very first person I did contact was Tim by Skype. And he was having a coffee, I think, at the cafeteria, so he's got the background of that. And that was just a sheer little joy. We could actually share that moment. And but it's not just for us. Hasn't been about us for a long time. Tim's took his stand on behalf of everyone. And I know it sounds maybe a bit holistic or whatever. We've done the same thing. This has been the right thing to do. Once you see the results of low carb, particularly in diabetes, you can't unsee them. When you see that people turn their lives around after having years of pain or years of struggling with obesity or weight control, or years of training for a sport but not achieving their goals, and you see things improve literally within weeks. From a mental health point of view, the world's out of control. People, up, highs and lows. Often talk about if you give kids sugar at a party, what do you see?
Okay, go crazy and then they fall asleep.
They fall asleep. Now, just imagine for 1 second that we actually gave sugar to everyone on the planet at one time. We'll see them anxious, depressed, tired, cranky, all at the one time. And guess what? That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
If you go shopping, you walk down the street, the vast majority of people are angry, anxious, depressed. So it's just all over the place. And I look at the way I eat now, and I realise I might be a bit, I might be a bit manic, or hypomania. But now I'm a laid back manic. I'm a lot more chilled now than I used to be. A lot less stressed, because I don't know if you saw on Twitter in the last week, I've been using one of those continuous glucose monitors.
Yeah, your breed experiment was fantastic, mate.
Oh, well, like I'm running along flatlining, and then I said to my anaesthetist, I operated all day, hadn't eaten, had a little bit of breakfast, bit of protein, bit of egg and last night's meat and veg. And then I literally don't eat all day when I'm operating, and you could see my CGM. I just flatline, go along. Oh my God, my brain is not dependent on having glucose, shoved down my throat every 20 minutes.
Well, it's there. You're not flatline 0. You're flatline at a level.
No, flatlining level in the normal range.
Yeah.
As I think I've tweeted about the fact, oh my God, who's sneaking glucose into my system if I don't have gluconeogenesis? But what I did is I went and had, I went from normal into what was clearly a diabetes zone. My blood glucose jumped to 10.
Mm.
And all I did was have 2 slices of bread. It tasted awful, by the way.
Mm.
But the bread I had was a multi-grain, 4.5 stars on the Health Star rating. The best possible bread that you can get, theoretically on the market, certainly in hospitals. So I didn't get the white bread. I didn't get the wholemeal bread. I got the best possible bread. And it flipped me from normal into a diabetes zone within 3/4 of an hour. I then had, my blood glucose was elevated for an hour and a half. I then came down. I went down below my resting blood glucose.
Mm.
And then I came back up again. Now that's called hangry.
Mm-hmm.
Now that when you're hunger and you're really looking for food. And it's fascinating. There it was. I can't get it more descriptive than that one curve. I just went from total control to out of control, hangry, and guess what? I felt sick when my blood glucose went into the diabetes zone. I felt hangry when my blood glucose was low. I did exactly the same experiment a few days earlier with 2 Weet-Bix. Just 2, 23 grams of carbohydrate. Nothing excessive. Yet as a kid, I'd go up and I'd often have 10 Weet-Bix.
Yeah.
We've got kids having, our son used to have 20 Weet-Bix a day.
Yeah.
It was a roller coaster of blood glucoses without being diabetic.
Yeah.
So I think that continuous glucose monitoring is almost mandatory to get one of those sensors, put them on people who've got diabetes. And within days, you will work out that if you eat sugar and carbs and processed food and too much fruit, particularly if it's not fresh, local and seasonal, you are going to be spiking your blood glucose up and down. And that if you eat low carb, healthy proteins, healthy fats, then you're going to flatline and you're going to stabilize your blood glucose. At the moment, that stuff's being experimented with to try and get into smartwatches.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, it involves a little flexible needle that sits underneath your skin for about 7 millimeters, and you wear it for 2 weeks. But gosh, what an incredible experiment to do for yourself. Mm. At the moment, it costs $190 to have the unit, and $95 every 2 weeks to, so if you're going to do it. But I can't, that's infinitely cheaper than the amount of money we spend on medication.
That's right. That Weet-Bix trial you did, it was funny. A personal trainer in New Zealand, Jamie Scott, sort of commented on it and started a bit of a stream, and he said, "Oh, that looks like my university." And I said, "Oh, same here." Ironically, when I was feeling low, it was in a sports nutrition lecture, and then I'd go through to because I'd have to change buildings at Otago Uni out towards the medical school, and I'd grab a filled roll on the way, and by the time I got to my anatomy lectures, I was asleep. Exactly the same. I went from being Weet-Bix or gym session, which I think was a bit of a protein, and then back home for some Weet-Bix, up throughout this nutrition lecture going, "Oh man, I'm hungry, man, I'm hungry, man, I'm hungry, man, I'm really hungry, need to get some food or else I'm going to die." Up again and then way down, and yeah, truly flatlining. And it was so funny the amount of people that continued to say, yeah, that was my university, that was my high school. Yeah. Horrible.
Well, there's a teenager here in Launceston who's spoken at one of our events, and he's got type 1 diabetes. So, that's the worst possible scenario. And his mother made him go low carb as a teenager. He was cranky about it or whatever, but he went from a disruptive kid that couldn't learn at school, that was self-doubting because he thought he was stupid because he was bouncing between his highs and lows, to a kid that the school said, hang on, we've got a new kid here. And he actually himself recognised that he could learn ultimately because he could actually think, he could comprehend. He just said, actually, I'm not stupid, Mum. Very powerful. To come out of a 15-year-old kid who's all of a sudden got control. So, I mean, the complications of diabetes, whether or not type 1 or type 2, are completely avoidable by running low carb and doing, flatlining rather than yo-yoing, getting off that roller coaster. And so, I mean, you can't avoid type 1. You might be able to prolong the honeymoon period of it. You may be able to push that out for a bit by running low carb and relieve the pancreas of some of its load. But we have to get rid of this mentality that's out there in the community that diabetes is a chronic progressive disease, that you'll require more and more medication and ultimately insulin, and you'll die of the sequelae, the complications. And that's still pretty well written up on most of the diabetes associations of the world, when it's a complete and utter myth. And that's where we'd like to see our efforts go. We need to change the guidelines. We need to stop them being rule books that people live in fear of questioning. There's an old adage that came out of a Harvard, not Harvard School of Public Health, but the Harvard Medical School, back I think in the 1930s. And the professor there he made a speech. He said, look, half of what we learn today, half of what we teach you is in fact wrong. We just don't know which half. Old adage, but I've gone back to get the quote. And the trouble is right now, and that's still just as relevant today as it was in the 1930s. At the moment, we've gotten to a situation where the guidelines are filled up with this information, and it's become the rule book, it's become the law. That's what happened to me. If you challenge the fact that my patient should not be getting 3 desserts per day in hospital, then you're seen as a heretic. Well, in fact, it's quite clearly what I'm doing is completely right. The byline on the bottom of my emails you'll see is, science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed. Getting back to the, only dead fish swim with the current. But if we actually, we need to challenge that. And if Belinda and I have a goal for this year and the next several years, it's actually to allow the concepts of low carb, healthy fat to enter into guidelines as being a safe option. I was just supporting someone this morning who's been threatened with child protection services because as a mother, she wants to run her child low carb. She's got great control with the kid, but the hospital and the doctors, the diabetes educators are forcing her to give the child carbohydrate. Now that may seem like crazy, but it is a story repeated over and over. Have you heard of type 1 grit?
I was about to get there with you, mate, and there's a movie coming out about this, like you're saying, that topic of all being threatened with child protective services.
R.D. Dykman, who's the originator of type 1 grit, Jimmy Moore and myself supported him when Dave Dykman put up a little video of himself as a 10-year-old running low carb with great results. And they were threatened with the whole child protection thing. It was great to support RD before he started type 1 grit, and it's gone on and it's enormous. But the type 1 gritters are the best 0.3% controlled type 1s in the world.
Most viewed article last year as well, wasn't it? Pediatrics.
Absolutely. The biggest published article on type 1 management running low carb with the most amazing results. And people, the critics go, oh, but that's a group of people who are enthusiastically embracing it. Yeah, I've got my health issue. I'm going to enthusiastically embrace something that makes my life better, and particularly if it's my children. So, but we need to get the concepts of eating fresh, local, seasonal food based on your beliefs and environment, cut out the crap processed food, that needs to be seen as safe. It's not a fad diet. Well, actually, it is a fad diet. Again, I stole this from Jimmy Moore. Fad diet, it's food against diabetes. You know, so if we're going to argue it as a fad diet, yes, it is a food against diabetes diet. It's a lifestyle. It changes everything. I had no idea when I started this journey, because it started with my health. I improved my own health. You improve the health of the people around you. You try and do the right thing by your patients. And I had no idea that I'd be chatting to you on a Sunday morning this is crazy. This is, and neither did Belinda. Belinda and I have just come back from speaking in Spain about this stuff. And we're off to Indonesia. I'm speaking to several hundred doctors there at the first low carb meeting for Southeast Asia. And diabetes is out of control in that population. High carb diets. The rice of today is not like the rice of yesteryear. The proportions of starches are far greater than they used to be. And this is all based on markets, economics, food industry. Fascinating time as we move ahead.
Absolutely, mate. You spoke about, and that's where we started off. This last lot of talking is about the mental health approach. And just prior to when your letter came out, I was privy to a doctor that was going through the judiciary situation, and he'd come in to see me because he had a blurry spot, and it turned out he'd actually had a thrombus behind his optic nerve, and ended up getting his carotid resectioned. And to hear another person go through such an awful case, and he was just telling me about how terrible it was, and that he was he was at the end of his career anyway, but he said, I'm done after this. I'm retiring. And definitely when we saw him 2 weeks later after he'd had that resection done, he was 100% retired. He was finished. He was not going back to work. And then coming to
he's gotten over the health issue, but he hasn't gotten over the investigation issue.
Yeah.
And we've got young doctors committing suicide. This is not just Australia, it's in the UK, it's in the US. We've got, if you criticise the system, which is what we should be doing, we should be called quality assurance. You're supposed to look at the current practices in light of the best available current medicine or science, and then review and have an open debate without fear of being punished. That term victimisation, actually, I know that because that's the legal term for it. I raised an issue of quality assurance and patient care, and I was punished as a result of it. Should never have happened, but it's not just happening to me. This is happening over and over and over. And your person's story is we need to change. We need to, as I say, guidelines can't become rule books. We have to have open discussions. We need to have open reviews. Lose that capacity, that star chamber mentality that occurred in my case. Freedom of information. In my case, APRA. I went through 5 levels before I got some of the documents that were supplied to APRA, and I know they've got thousands. I've probably got 100 back or something, and they're redacted. Where they're blacked out. The ridiculous thing is that my own letters to APRA were blacked out. So what I wrote, my own letters, were too controversial for me to see. How does the system? We'd love to think in Australia we've got freedom of speech and it's free, but in Australia, 800,000 or 750,000 health care professionals, they go to work every day in fear of their regulatory body being totally irrational.
Yeah.
And I'll continue to speak out about APRA until they do the reform.
Absolutely. That was what I was getting as I was coming here, having in New Zealand, lucky we've got Grant and Garen and people like Cliff Harvey speaking that low carb paradigm. You're encouraged to talk about diet and things, and coming to Australia knowing your history, I was a bit nervous. I was doing it anyway with the premise that Tim Noakes was being cleared. Here's an example that this is work. There's science here to back it up. And then when your letter came through again, another thank you from me is that I was like, right, this is open borders, and I was, I'll remind you again to contact Grant. But talking to him the other week, I said to him, Gary's been apologised by APRA, so I took that as let's go. So every person that comes in type 1, it's have you heard about type 1 grip? Every person that comes in type 2 has a family member who's type 2. It's do you know how to reverse it? And the answer is always no. And what do you mean reverse? And they get David Unwin's simple piece of advice from his paper, and I explained to them that of the 20 that completed it, 18 reversed it. The other 2 were losing weight. This is backed up by the Verta Health study, And then some of them might talk about, I heard about 5-2 or intermittent fasting. I say, yeah, exactly. Jason Fung just had 3 patients who are on insulin, 5 to 16 days gone. They're off insulin, intermittent fasting. Even South Australia has got intermittent fasting, works just as good, if not better, than calorie restricted. And then you talk about that continuous glucose meter. Again, Australia has shown that the worst thing for the continuous glucose meter was cornflakes. Lily Nichols, who had on here, put up her oatmeal or porridge the other day. Whack!
That's right.
Up it goes.
It's I'd like to be really positive and say, this will be the end of the cereal and the food industry, No. But guess what? We're up against a few bucks there, and we're up against a few vested interests. But what we've realised is that we want to continue to support those people that want to make a difference for themselves. And we want to support those practitioners that are willing to stand up and put their head above the parapet. And so my win last year, I think, was really important for healthcare professionals here in Australia. It really said, and it was icing on the cake, with Tim's. And if we've been part of a movement that's made a difference, and that's a good way to leave it, And so that's really what we're doing, I suppose, at the moment, is just calling out the vested interests, getting an enormous amount of support from the public and yourself, and I know you've supported me over time, and spreading that message little bit by little bit is critical, and you may not be able to do. Social media, I suspect, is going to be closed down at some point in time. Again, I'm not depressed, and I have a case of what's called hyper-pragmatism.
You're aware of it.
I'm aware of it. Okay, hang on. Am I being depressed about this or overly anxious? No, this is actually happening. All this stuff is actually happening. And so rather than, and so I'm okay with that. Okay, it's happening. But as long as you're aware of who's screwing you over, from where information coming when you go to the shops or the supermarket or even your local market. I remember going to the local market last year, and I said to this guy, he was selling cheese, and I said, "Was this a high-fat cheese or a low-fat cheese?" He said, "Oh no, it's low-fat." I said, "Don't give me that." So he was trying to sell me a product. He had no idea who I was, but I was mucking around. So I mean, even the local farmers market was trying to second guess the low-fat message.
Yeah.
And so it's coming at you all the time. So, and the trouble is, I've been accused of actually creating more confusion in the community. I go, okay, so be it. But it's a simple message. Don't believe everything you read
or told.
Or told. But then I've also got a cop-out clause. I say, look, I've had brain tumour and I've had brain surgery, so don't trust me either. So.
Yeah, I've had concussion, so don't listen to me. You say about the vested interests and what you're being told. You just got to go to a CPD event and see who sponsored it. And we had one on diabetes, and it turned out it was an ad for fenofibrate. And you say about trying to get information out of boards, that there was an opportunity to ask some questions during that webinar, and most of them were about how do we get Medicare funding. So that was a waste of time. But I emailed, you know, these studies that this stuff comes from show Jackal, the effect is like 1 in 20 if you're lucky on the select population, and that select population is probably not too good for them because it stuffs their kidneys and things. And then the response I got back was basically the party line that they presented in the webinar. So I emailed them back some links and citations, and I'm still waiting to hear back from them. And you know, you don't have to go far to scratch the surface and just look at the sponsor of who's presenting this webinar to go, well, is this information correct, or should I actually go and look at that reference and look at the absolute risk? And you know, I think people, LDL skeptic, can't remember what his actual name is, who just published about the statin, the actual absolute risk reduction is
Malcolm Kendrick.
Yes, sorry, that's who it is.
Look, in Australia last year, the national meeting for diabetes, you had to pay about $900 in registration for the 2.5-3 day event. But on top of that, they received sponsorship of about $650,000 to $700,000 from the pharmaceutical industry. And we've run meetings. If you charge everyone $900, you don't need you don't need sponsorship. So they received. What on earth is Diabetes Australia, you know, and affiliated organisations receiving in the vicinity of $500,000 from the pharmaceutical industry to put on pharmaceutical related topics.
Plus the appearance fee for the trade fair out the front while you're having your.
This is on top of. Yeah. They received sponsorship, you know, in that degree. Dietitians associations have been exactly the same. I mean, these are their fundraising events. You know, we put on events. I can guarantee the events we've put on over the years, we haven't made any money. I think we had 600 people at one of our talks. And people said, you must have made a truckload of money. I said, by the time we flew in the speakers, paid for everything, I think we had $1,000 there, which got thrown back into, you know, patient education. But you know, you compare that to sanitarium in Australia that doesn't pay any tax. You know, so, and all they do is put it back into more education. So they've got their overheads are reduced because they're all employ themselves. They quote their own literature. They don't pay tax, so they've got this. Just imagine the enormity of the cereal and soy industry of Australia and the world. That the profits from that, a significant portion of those are going back into an education to tell us that we should be having more cereal and soy. And so when you chase it down, and that's where the Eat Lancet is. Oh, sorry, I lie. We should be having more cereal, soy, and fake meat. That's that's the next. Watch this spot because that's our prediction.
Which is soy expelia and soy oil. It's the byproducts of those first two processes.
And so, and they'll use whatever argument they can for salvation because we've followed that over. Started with meat makes you masturbate, meat is violent. Meat causes cancer back in the 19th century. Then we came up with meat causes heart disease, which is really the first half of the 20th century. And then we came back to meat causes cancer again, and it's such lousy association data, 0.14 for colon cancer with processed meat, but real red meat has never really been shown to have that effect. Again, association data rather than actual causation. And now we're on the current phase, which is that meat causes climate change. It is such a small contributor to that equation when everyone's running around in their planes and their transport. It's not nothing, but it's a small part of it, and the amount of blame that's been put on it is so excessive. So let's call it out for what it is. It's fake news, but it's keeping us distracted. The real ball game is how do we sell more soy? How do we sell more cereal? How do we sell more fake meat? But let's be open about it. It's about corporate money and ideology for a small number of the world's populations and their salvation. I know it sounds hard to believe, but that's what, you know, it's actually uncovered. And when you go looking for it, watch out for the next Deep Lancet thing coming out in the next week or two. Because we found the same parallels underneath it there. There's links up there with, again, the food industry, not so much with the food industry, but with the ideology. It's there. And so, but you know, they don't declare it.
No.
So it's up to you and me and others to say, hang on. But you know, unfortunately, our reaches are not billions.
No.
You know.
Yeah.
But ripple effects there.
Yeah. Mate, where do people find you? And I'd recommend that they sit down with a cup of tea when they do find you, because there's a lot there. Where do people find you, mate?
I look, the vested interest stuff and some of the science is at isupportgary.com. Belinda set that up to try and help clear my name, but as it's turned out, she's put a lot of this stuff there. And that links back to the science. So, and if you want to be a player in the game, you know, I highly recommend all the stuff on there. My website's a bit out of date, called nofructose.com. I've actually been having to spend more time fighting the authorities that I've ordered. I'm on Twitter as Fructose No, but you can search Gary Fetke or Belinda Fetke, you'll find us both there. And Facebook is Belinda Fetke No Fructose. It used to be Gary Fetke No Fructose, but we literally put up the middle finger when that came out, and so just changed it from Gary Fetke to Belinda Fetke. Yeah. So look, we're out there and we're contactable, and we like supporting people. So thanks for your time.
Lovely. So what's something that you'd like to leave us with, Gary? Maybe, I don't know if there's any more gems from your book or ways you've been thinking about this whole process, or what's kept you going throughout it all. What have you harked back to? What's been important to you to carry on?
I've been a contrarian forever, I suppose. You know in yourself when it's right. When you get rid of all the smoke and haze and mirrors, you can actually see with great clarity. And if it comes down to, I use that quote: "Science evolves by being challenged, not by being followed." And that's not just science; it's everything. You know, just question it. And question the history of stuff, and then a lot of it unfolds. And I didn't study history at school, but you know, history repeats itself, and it's there. So my motto going forth is, have someone around you who loves you, and that's, I think, which is about whether or not that's family or a partner or that sort of thing. That comes with a degree of stability and health, and the fuel you put in your tank's the most important bit of that. So I'll come back and say low carb, healthy fat, eat fresh, local, seasonal. There's no controversy in it at all. The only harm that this is doing is to the corporates, not to the health of the people. Oh, that's a long answer, wasn't it?
And that's good. That's why we're on a podcast, so we can talk. Thanks so much, Gary, and again, thank you for everything you've done. Like I said, it was one of the beacons that made me continue to be out there and say to my patients, hey, the story you're hearing or living by is not the full story. Here's another element, here's another way of thinking, and here's something that you can take, power and responsibility for, and feel better, get off these medications and live a better life and be there for the kids and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, thank you very much.
I think essentially when I get painted into a corner, I get fairly stubborn.
Yeah, lovely.
As we all do.
Absolutely. Well, good. We'll end it there. Thanks so much.
Excellent. All right. Was that okay?